So okay, so this is great. Okay. This brings up something that I think is really, really important and worth talking about. And it's where I ended the little reflection piece that I wrote about your conversation with Daniel. And it has to do with my ability to participate in church right now, because I have people ask me, I mean, not infrequently, right? Like, well, where do you go to church? Right? Because like I like to talk about God. I'll talk about, all I want to do is talk about God and Jesus. Like that, and that's why I say, like, I find myself more a Christian, because Jesus specifically for me is like, that's like, let's go there. If we can go anywhere, let's go there. Um, but my answer to that question has become like, I'm trying really hard to figure out, like, how do I answer that question truthfully? Because I don't know, like, I don't understand it. And I think what it really comes down to is that in my upbringing, I I was there was a deep sense of trauma in relation to Christianity and church. Now, that trauma, it's interesting because, like, even as I hear you talk about these different people around me who had a similar sort of experience of church that I did, they will talk about particular people as seeming to be disingenuous and inauthentic and abusing the system and things like that. But that wasn't really my experience so much.
Hmm.
My experience, my parents, everyone that I think I got to know in those churches, I think there was a real sense of authenticity. I think the greatest gift my parents gave me was that, like, they were committed wholeheartedly to doing the best thing they could manage,
Mhm.
however it made sense. And that ended up being pretty traumatic because of some particular, you know, just circumstances of their life and who they ended up around and those sorts of things. But those other people they ended up around in the church too, that brought some of these traumatic strains, they were pretty authentic too. I think, like, I don't see them as being malicious people,
Hmm.
but there were these strains of it that incurred on my relation to reality and my relation to God specifically, as mediated by the church in that upbringing, that were really harmful, really difficult, really, like, caused all the sorts of problems that then get projected into this cultural model. And I notice, like, my problem now is that when I go to a church, I have a hard time. Like, when I go to church, all that shows back up for me
Hmm.
in a way that it doesn't have to when I don't go to church, right? And so when I go and visit churches now, I've sort of become aware of the fact that it's going to be an exercise for me. It's like it's a spiritual exercise for me to go to church to deal with my own trauma. Now, there's a way that I can make that a way bigger deal than it actually is.
Mhm.
And that's a real danger, right? Um, and my wife and I are, my wife has her part of that too, and, like, so we're trying to work through that and actually find some church where we can plug into. And that's so that this is just a particular snapshot of where I'm at on this journey. But I think really what I'm trying to point to here is, like, I wonder how many of us that are in this sort of like post-Christian space and trying to work our way around the edges of all these issues like faith and excavate all these things that became sort of hollowed out um and slandered, as you said at the beginning, virtues, Christian virtues that got sort of like slandered and hollowed out. um I was just working through a process doing this with some friends on the notion of purity, especially from a Christian perspective, which is that's a big one, right? That causes all kinds of cultural right? Um, but as we're sort of excavating it, we're like, whoa, okay, this is really powerful and really beautiful.
Mhm.
So it's like there's this process that I think we're all sort of trying to go through, where it's like, okay, how do we how do we remain faithful to the position that we've just find ourselves in? Right? I just showed up in this life with this particular set of, you know, traumas that were given to me in relation to God. And now I'm like, no, no, I really want that thing. I really want that relationship with God. I really want that relationship with Christ. but I also need to be true to who I truly am. I'm not going to leave any parts of those behind. And so, like, coming back into that.
Well, there's no but there, right? Because I am the truth. You can't have a proper relationship with Christ if you are not fully in truth. Like there's no alternative. So you actually have this other half over here, like that deepening of truth, is a part of the coming back up here.
Yeah.
And maybe that's been part of the journey that we collectively have been on for maybe a few generations, is kind of like a carving out of a new capacity to delve more deeply into truth so that we can actually develop more capacity to come more fully into relationship with Christ. I've had that sense, right? I have a sense of that this has not all been like a giant digression. The Lord uses things to move everything towards the good. And whether or not we've been, we call it, doing our normal thing and worshiping a golden calf 20 seconds after crossing the Red Sea, which we probably have been, nonetheless, all of that is being put to some proper good use. And so